There used to be a time that I would only head to the woods for a walk rather than for photography if the sun was shining in a bright blue sky. I think like many people I was probably always craving those magical misty conditions or the ethereal qualities of snow or the softening effect of rain. But here in the UK we've had some widespread mist and fog recently, so I've no doubt you'll see quite a few woodland vlogs this weekend. But I wanted to discuss a sometimes overlooked alternative which I think works really well at this time of year. I recently enjoyed a couple of hours wandering in a local woodland that I frequent. It's a beautiful area of predominantly oak trees which flank this babbling stream in a quiet sheltered valley. It's undoubtedly one of my favourite woodlands to photograph at any time of year in any season, but it's certainly worth my time and attention when the sun shines on a clear and calm afternoon in late autumn. Now, firstly I should say that sometimes woodland photography is disregarded on a blue sky day, and it's probably because it creates a few more challenges such as potentially harsh contrast, sort of messy shadow patterns, bleached colour, and it perhaps becomes a bit more difficult to capture that calming essence and mood of woodland. You might avoid that kind of chaotic scattering of light by shooting towards it and working with shapely silhouettes or sunburst effects. But for me personally, I'm a big fan of subtlety and trying to capture that wonderful array of colour and detail that make our woodland so fascinating. Here's one of the first images I made under a blue sky recently. I found and then photographed this oak tree numerous times, and so I've got to know it really quite well over the years. I've seen it in all the seasons and a variety of conditions, and yet a sunny late autumn afternoon is so far my favourite time to capture it, and I'm certainly happy with this rendition. So why does it work for me? Well, firstly it's the topography of the woodland. I was looking directly at the oak tree with the opposite valley side, providing a busy yet non-distracting backdrop. Importantly though, it's the effect of the sunlight, ambient light and reflected light working with the topography to create a wonderful contrast of colour. So it was around 2 p.m, which was late enough for the sun to only just start to dip behind the opposite hillside. This caused the opposite side to be shaded, but the clear blue sky created an ambient light which makes the shadows cooler. That's ingredient number one. Number two is the soft warmish backlighting on the autumn leaves, which allows them to stand out against the cool shade. For lighting ingredient number three, it's the timing that is crucial, as it's the reflected light from the sun hitting the trees behind me that illuminates the beautiful detail in the textured bark. Combine the lighting ingredients with a fantastic subject, beautiful varied autumn colours and careful composition, and you've got this cocktail which I think works beautifully. Perhaps not that initial high impact of sunbeam shining through the mist, but quiet, delicate and considered. I applied the same principles to this version, which I took a little bit later in autumn 2019, but slightly earlier in the afternoon. To illustrate the effect further, here's a couple more images that I made within that same brief wander. Firstly, this neat little square is of an oak tree which is right next to the oak tree in the previous image. Perhaps easily missed against the grandeur of its neighbour, but well worth capturing in my opinion. What's quite nice here is that the warm reflected light is subtle but obvious enough on the bark of the trunk. We have contrasting backlit greens and yellows along with layers and textures, and the band of cool shade to facilitate the prominence of our subject, and we're using colour and form to help frame the image. Here I was trying to hone in on the shapes, arrangements of colour and framing with colour, which again was highlighted by the backlit golden leaves against the coolness of the shaded green foliage of the older trees. Some warmth and detail on the bark was able to come through due to the sunlight reflecting off the nearby trees. I do quite like this image and it highlights the concept I'm discussing, but compositionally I don't think it's as successful as an image called Tree Storm, which I took last year. Back to the recent shoot, and this is the last image that I made, which is a little bit later than ideal because of the fading light, but I guess it highlights the opportunities that are still available under the ambient light of the clear sky. The contrasting coolness in the shade isn't as pronounced because the sun had dropped a little too low, but the colours still rendered beautifully. In addition to colour contrast, there's emphasis on layering, framing and connection. We have a shaded foreground of green ferns, a band of rusty bracken after the first tree, and an interconnecting canopy of golden oak leaves framing the distant mossy oak, which is just catching the last of the evening light. I'm quite fond of the two yellow ferns which occupy the otherwise comparatively empty space. For me, not as successful as the first image, but yeah, I still really quite like it. As always, everything that I discuss are just methods and thought processes that work for me and the places that I've got to know quite intimately. But hopefully you can enjoy practicing the same general concepts in the places that you love to shoot. Tips and tricks offered to you in videos can be sound advice, but they are not going to make you masters of woodland photography. There is just simply no substitute for being amongst trees year in, year out, season to season, witnessing and observing just how dramatically a scene can change with the seasons, conditions and light. I wouldn't change my years of ignorance for anything, because for me the joy is in the practicing and the fulfillment is in the figuring out. I quite like this quote by a chap called Stephen McCraney, which is, "The master has failed more times than the beginner has tried." But equally, I don't think a walk in the woods can ever be perceived as a failure. But that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. I will be back next week with an on-location video, so please tune in for that. Please also check out my website for things such as details on workshops, some beautiful prints, some workshop gift vouchers and online tuition, that sort of thing. But thank you very much for watching this episode, and as always, I look forward to seeing you for the next one.